that Brian Buffini called you a couple of days ago.
Yes.
So I'm sorry, I had to interrupt the story and turn on the camera because that's just too good to miss.
Oh. Well, when Brian called me, you know, he's really an inspirational speaker. You know, he inspires people to do, and he's godly. You know, he has God in his heart, and you feel that. And he's really the most generous of men.
Okay.
And he has this Irish twang, sort of yet, you know. And so he's a very handsome young man, but he inspires everybody he talks to be better. Number one, to know that they can do more in life, and that mostly, I suppose, it's down to something we used to all say, is that you can do it. You can do it. And very strong on you can do it. And I think I sort of grew up with that kind of an attitude because I think I sort of remember my father saying one time, just because you're girls, don't mean you can't do everything you want to do as well as men. And that sort of stuck with me for a long time. And, well, forever, I guess, because I now know that whatever I put my mind to, I can do with the grace of God. And so it's been 96 years of wonderful memories, wonderful people in my life, my children, my nieces, my nephews, my sisters, my brother, everybody I have been fortunate in that God has put the most wonderful people in my life. I don't have anybody that I remember as not giving me something, some thought, some good, something. And my life has been wonderful. I've seen everything that was really the beginning of when things were happening beyond a horse and buggy.
Right.
And you know, I can remember sitting beside one of those, what did you call those little TVs that were just like plugged, not really covered or anything. Well, I don't remember, but those, we used to sit around and listen to those, and we all,
You mean like with the big tube on it and it was sitting above a box? It wasn't in a box?
it wasn't in a box, and some of them were that small.
Right.
But I remember us all sitting around the radio at nighttime.
Right.
And I definitely remember Franklin Roosevelt saying, we have nothing to fear, it's fear itself.
So you were born in 1917.
17.
So 1917, 37, you were 15 years old? 15, 16 years old?
I never know how old I was, but I was there.
You were a teenager
I was a
when World War
teenager.
II broke out.
Let's see, I guess so. World War II, yeah. No, because Ken was in World War II.
Right.
Well, yeah, I was a teenager.
You were a teenager when you got married too, weren't you?
No, I was 20-something when we got
Okay.
married because I didn't see my husband for 2 years. It was something like that. And if he hadn't come back to my door, I would never have seen him again. I would never have talked to him again. I was very independent. I know that's a surprise to you. But it was the war. The war was a different type of war because we were attacked. And I remember the president saying, this day will live in infamy.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody knew that it was a war, and everybody was connected with it. And I had a job as secretary to the Textile Workers Union. And one of my jobs was to go to all the textile workers' places and sell war bonds.
Mm.
And, you know.
I did my math wrong. You were 25, not 15.
Yeah.
You were a grown-up. You were
I
an
was a
adult.
grown-up then, yeah. And so we all worked during that time, and we felt a part of it, you know. And I think that's what's so different now is that it's like you just watch a movie of it. It's not that unless you have a child or a son or a daughter who's in it, you're removed from it. You know, there's a little bit in the paper, there's a little bit on TV, but I don't know a neighbor whose son has died like I did back then, you know. And I think we saved things like grease. I don't know why we saved it, but we put it in tin cans, and every so often it was picked up. And you know, I think we were more part of everyday living than we are now. You know, we're not as involved with each other as much as, like, I'm not talking about a relationship like we have, but just like a neighbor or somebody. Like, for example, we know the names of some of the neighbors in here, but outside of our inviting them to our house when we had a party for our customers, we invite the neighbors to come. And we're really friendly with the man next door, but he has never invited us to his house to come in for a drink.
Right.
And but he'll come over and he'll talk to us. But so we're in this environment which I've never been in before.
Well, so like when you were, even before the war years, a neighborhood it was almost like an extension of the family.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So talk a little bit about that, because people my age and younger don't even have a concept of that.
Oh, well, of course, when there was a war, I told you that Ken was on this little island called Marrowstone Island.
Right.
And you had to take a boat to get to it from Seattle. And it was nothing except like the Navy post. And so sonar it was like at the entrance, you had to go through by that to get to Bremerton. So it was a really well-guarded place because it came right down this in front of this little island, you know. And we saw many of the big ships come back from battle.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one, and it was in the paper, and I can't remember its name, but we saw that because we were living in a house on like 60 feet above the water. And the sailors were out on the port, I guess you call it the port side, or whatever the outside of the boat is where people,
Okay.
They were out there, and they were just so happy to be back, and they were waving, and we were waving back, and they were so happy to be home, you know. And it was really great to see that ship had been out to sea for 2 years. Those men had not seen home for 2 years. And they were so excited about being home and going down the street to Bremerton where they knew they were home then. And they were just jumping up and down, and they were waving and they were shouting. And we were doing the same thing back. But, you know, we're just a little minority here. But it was wonderful to be able to see our boys coming back and to, like, sort of put your hand to your heart and say, this is the America we know. This is the land of the free. And so, you know, there were many exciting times there. But mostly it was living like maybe like below poverty level, because there was nothing on the island. You only got to go to the mainland once a month, and that was because the money you got came from the government once a month, which was like nothing. They don't pay the soldiers anything or the sailors anything. And
They still don't.
yeah, I know. It's one of my pet peeves. One of my pet peeves is
Mine too.
they don't pay our boys enough. And they don't pay our veterans enough. That's what gets me. They don't take care of our veterans. And I don't think a veteran has to go from here to Clearwater to get help. I think that they should be able to walk into Sarasota Memorial Hospital and the government picks up that bill. You know, if you're really sick, why should you have to go to Clearwater, which is 40 miles or something like that? That's not good when you're sick. And no veteran should have to do that. And I don't think we treat our veterans very good. I find our country very lax in how they treat our veterans.
I agree.
And if I were able to, I'd get out and march against the country and say, do something. These boys and girls deserve more than they're getting, because it seems to me that when they come home, the country forgets about them. And that angers me, because they have been somewhere where they put their lives on for us. And, you know, our country should be more appreciative of the effort that they have made and the risks they have given of their lives.
I hope we're doing a better job of that now than we did, say, after Vietnam or even after Korea. You know, I know that, because I couldn't serve.
Disgrace. That was a disgrace the way we treated them.
Exactly.
And I don't know, you know, it's hard to change things because you don't really have a voice. You know, you have to get out and pound the sidewalk, or you have to get behind some political group or something to change things. And so that never came my way. But I can tell you that I would have marched any day to get better deals for our veterans. And Jim, you know, Stan's son Jim, now works for an organization that raises funds for the veterans.
Oh, I didn't know that's what he did.
Yeah. And it's like a motorcycle group, and they will go to like a different county or somewhere. A bunch of bikers will get together there, and then they'll do some kind of a performance or something and collect money, and then they give it to the veterans.
Oh, that's good.
And since Jim is a veteran himself, it's very close to
I
his
didn't know
heart.
that either.
Well, Jim was in the Army, and he was in the
Air Force, Marines.
The Marines. He was in the Marines.
That's pretty unusual for them to go from one to the other.
Mhm.
It's more unusual for a Marine to go be in the Army, but
Well, he went to the Army first, and then he went to the Marines.
right.
And so, you know, so that's what he does now, is he raises money for veterans. And, you know,
I've got a good friend who's a Marine, and he says, "Quit calling me a soldier. I'm a Marine.
yeah,
Soldiers are Army guys.
yeah,
We're
Yeah,
ahead
they're-
of them."
they're very proud of the thing.
Yeah, oh,
that they
and
were Marines.
For the most part, they earned it.
They did, because their training is harder, and they are sent to places that a regular Army doesn't go, and they're on the first call, you know.
I asked my Marine friend, you know, the Navy has their special services called the SEALs, and the Army
Yeah.
has the Rangers and the Green Berets. What does the Marines have? He says, we are special services.
Yeah.
I said, okay, I get it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're very proud of Marines.
So,
So what?
so you started in St. Louis in 1917. You're the youngest of a family that was 5, became
Yeah.
4.
Yes.
Okay. 3 sisters
Yes.
and a brother.
Yes.
All the girls are named Mary.
All the girls are named Mary. My cousins are all named Mary.
I didn't know. I've never even met that part of the family.
Well, you know, Arlene is Mary Arlene. And just everybody, all of my cousin girls were named Mary, something like Mary Jane, Mary Helen, you know.
So your
Yeah.
sisters were Mary Lou, Mary Juanita, and Mary Arlene.
I had a sister
Lorraine,
who died,
okay.
Mary Lorraine. And she died while my mother was carrying me. But my mother thought that because it was so close that if I were a girl, we looked like twins. And so since she was Lorraine, my mother thought Arlene sounds like a name to go with it, you know. And of course, we were all Marys.
Right.
And where was I going with this?
I don't remember. What was your brother's name?
Ralph. Ralph Joseph.
And that's why everybody called him Bud, because he didn't like to be
He
called
didn't
Ralph.
like to be called. No. And he took George for a confirmation name. And so, no, he did not take. He was Ralph Joseph. He took Joseph for a confirmation name, which made him Ralph Joseph Joseph. Ken, I think, took George. You know, as a family, my father, up until my mother died, I never lived in a house that we didn't own.
Right.
And I had to backtrack that because I have never lived in a house I never owned.
Right.
And I bought my first house when I was 18. And I had to put it in my father's name. And after my mother died, my father began to drink more. And so somebody came up to the house and asked for me. And when I went out to talk to him, they said, I just want to tell you that your father is gambling down at the bar and he's about ready to put the deed of the property. I couldn't be it because I was 18 and he has to be older, you know. He's about to put the deed of the property up for what?
A bet. He's
bet.
going to gamble your house.
And so I got right out that door and I walked down to my father and I said to him, hand me that deed. And he did. And I said, now I want you to sign it over to me. And he did. But I had borrowed the money to buy it to begin with. So,
Right.
You know, it was really mine, but I wasn't old enough until then to own it.
Right.
And so I just said to him, sign this deed. You know?
You can make yourself homeless, but not get my house.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, I always thought of myself as being, and I still do, as being sort of laid back.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very slow to anger. But if you make me angry, you better be a good runner.
Even today, I wouldn't try to make you angry.
Even today, no matter what, just be careful. I'm there. But, and we used to always laugh at my sister Nita because she was a fireball. And she'd get mad at me. And, well, we'd wash dishes and I'd sort of antagonize her a little bit and she'd get mad and she would want to chase me. And we had some kind of a cabinet and it was out about that far from the wall. Well, I was skinny as a rail. People used to say to my mother, she's going to die of consumption, you know. Well, I got the cream off the top of the milk and everything, you know. Anyway, you know, she was a fireball.
And you were hiding behind the cabinet?
I could get behind that cabinet and she couldn't reach me.
Yeah.
Because she was chubby when she was a little girl. And so I knew I was safe if I would never torment her unless I was near that. Because the one thing I could say to her that would really infuriate her was to say, you're just like Aunt Nora. You've got a temper just like Aunt Nora. And Aunt Nora was like a fireball herself, you know. She had that temper. And as kids, whatever she said to us, we did. She was like our grandmother. My father's parents were really not like grandparents to us. And I think it's because my grandfather, I think I told you this, cut a switch from the tree and gave him a few whacks with it. And he left home. And so they really weren't as affectionate to him after that, or to us, you know. And so the one who really loved us was Aunt Nora. And I told you she was sharp-tempered. So, you know, we didn't do anything that would upset her that she could catch us. And so it was just, she was really like our grandmother. And we all knew that she loved us. And I remember one night when we were just, well, like my sisters were. Maybe Lou was like in her teens or close to it, and then down to me. And I guess because my mother and dad were preparing Christmas for us, we were at her house, and she wanted to do her own tree or something. And so she made a pallet on the floor for us. And she said, "You are to go to sleep right now." You know. So we're laying there, we're looking at one another, we roll our eyes, you know. And I guess we moved, and she came in and she said, "I said you were to go to sleep right now." So, you know, we sort of knew that she meant it, but we tried her one more time. And that was really our downfall. Because she came in and she really laid us flat. We just knew that we better go to sleep. But she was a wonderful woman, and I loved her. She was like my grandmother. But she was not soft, you know. But my Uncle Joe had rheumatoid arthritis, and he couldn't work anymore because his hands were all affected. They were like this, and his feet were bad. And in general, I guess his health wasn't too. And so my dad had bought our house on University, which in my heart and my sister's heart was always like, no matter where we moved, was always the home. And so my uncle couldn't really make stairs or anything, but they lived upstairs. And my dad had a not a machine shop, but like he repaired car.
Yeah.
In the garage. And they used to go up and they'd tease him and they'd do things like, and they'd tie his feet to the chair. And, you know, and then they'd say to him, "Well, you know, we're never coming back." And then, of course, like 10 minutes later, they were back. And he knew that they were. So it was in their mind, it was something that kept him being a part of life going on, you know. And it was, as a matter of fact, when my father got a settlement, my mother was not bright sometimes. My father got a settlement, and she said to him,
for an accident or something?
Yeah, he hurt his back and he wore a brace for a long while. And I don't know. Then I think maybe it was $10,000 or something like that, which is
a big ton of money then, yeah.
And so my mother adored the ground that my father walked on. And she thought she was so lucky to have found this man. She spoiled him rotten. You know, whatever my dad wanted, it was okay, just give it to him, you know. And as I grew older, I thought, you know, there's something wrong with this picture. And after my mother died, my father had a big awakening because I think he thought that I was like going to take my mother's place in the family, not as his wife, but as the family, you know.
Right.
Well, I did. I worked and I supported the family and I bought the house that we were in. But I didn't do the things for him. I didn't cater to him like my mother did, because next to our Lord was my father, my mother. And my father was an on-again, off-again Catholic. And tell me when you get bored with this.
No, this is all new stuff to me.
When my father would be on-again Catholic, we would all go to Mass together and communion, and we'd come home, and my mother would fix this tremendous meal, you know, and everybody would be so happy that my dad was back in church. And then he'd get mad about something, and one of the things he got mad about is that people thought of God as a man. Like a man, still God, but a man God.
Right.
And he said, no, he said, God has to be a woman because no man has those kind of feelings except a woman is the only one that has those kind of feelings, you know. And so anyway, his faith was like on again, off again. But when he died, when he was dying, he asked for a priest. My sister said, I'm not calling one. I think I told you that.
You told me, but you didn't tell them.
Oh, didn't I? Oh.
Tell us.
Oh, well, I don't want her children to ever hear this.
Mike, don't worry about it.
All right.
Everybody you're telling on is dead.
When my father was, we thought, dying, and I said, and he was staying with my sister at that time. We shared him somewhere. And so she said that she called me. We talked like 2 and 3 times a day. You know, we were really close. And she called me this one time and she said, well, Dad asked for a priest and I told him he wasn't going to get one. And you know how neat it could be.
Yeah.
And I said to her, you don't have the right to say that. And she says, yes, I do. I'm not asking a priest to come in my house and be insulted by my father. And so I'm really quiet, you know, because I look up to my sister for my religious beliefs. You know, she's 4 years older than I am. And so whatever she said about God, I took seriously. So finally, you know, I said to her, Nita, if Dad asked for a priest, you have to do that. She says, I'm not calling a priest to have my father insult him. And I said, isn't that his job? You know, his job is to be there when people are dying. And whether or not they're nice to him or not is not the point. I said, the point is your father asked for a priest. And she gave me a really hard time. And I said, you know, I'm going to call the priest at your parish and say who I am and where my parish is. And you'll be sorry when he comes. And so she said, okay, you know. So she said, but he better not say anything. So I said, look, Nita, if he's called for a priest, he's sincere and he thinks he's dying and he wants God to forgive him. Give him that chance, you know. My sister could really be hard. And so she called him. And of course, my father made a full confession. And, you know, he was nice to the priest and he received communion, he received full absolution. I don't know that they had what kind of
They call
apostolic act.
right. They used to call them last rites, but
Last
now
rites.
now it's the sacrament of healing, I think.
Yeah. And the apostolic rites absolves you of all sin and all punishment thereof. So if you ever think you're dying, don't fool around. Just say, give me the apostolic rite. And so I said to Chris, you know, I don't know how long all this grace is going to last with me. So if I get really sick, call them and say, she wants the apostolic rite.
I don't think you have a lot of trouble getting into heaven. I really don't.
Well, you don't know me as God knows me.
I can't forgive the way God can either. So
Well, you know, I don't have a really quick temper, and I basically am kind of laid back, and I think kind. But I have a streak, you know.
well, because you're human.
Just don't get in my way when I have that streak, you know. One time, I have to tell you this about your uncle. Ken almost never said anything that would upset me. He basically let me do whatever I wanted to do because he knew that if he said don't do it, it was like a red flag, and there it was. But this one time, I was painting our house at the lodge, And you know how when you paint it, the color is different. It might be the same color, but it's different because it's not aged.
Right.
So I'm out there and I'm painting the building that was all one story, and I'm up on like a bench and I'm painting. And I had one of our tenants there had really become a good friend. And I was up on the bench painting. And he comes home, and now it's really hot, and I'm painting. And I've done one whole side of the house, and I'm at the front door, and I'm painting over that. I still have the whole back to do. I'm painting over that. And I'm up on this table, like a picnic table, painting, because I could go. And so Ken comes home. My neighbor, who is a real Irish woman, was standing out. Well, she was renting for us, and she was standing out talking to me. And Ken came up and said, "That doesn't really match." And she took one look at me, and she got to that front door, and she went in so fast that you could hardly see her move. And so, I just vented, out painting all the time. It's new paint, and he's telling me it doesn't match. So it took me a little while to get down from the table. And I said to him, "You better get out of my way, and don't talk to me for a long time. I'm not good enough at holding my temper to be nice to you."
And,
So he got out of my way.
and you were married how many years?
Well, let's see. We were we moved there in 1959. About 20 years.
No, I mean, how long were you married? When did you
That's
guys?
what I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
No,
you were married 20 years then. So
Yeah.
how long were you married before he died?
before he died.
Yeah, it was over 50, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. It was like 62 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, and that was the worst fight you ever had in 62 years?
Well, not exactly.
Okay, let's
I
hear
knew
about
there was a better story
let's
under
hear
that
about the
one.
worst one.
Well, I don't remember exactly what he said to me. But I was doing something, that was hard and difficult and that. And whatever I was doing, I had a knife in my hand. And, it was hard work, and I was tired, and I just wasn't really my calm, loving self. And he said something to me, and I threw the knife at him. Now, I didn't have a good aim.
Thank goodness.
I threw the knife at him. And one time, when we first moved there, this isn't a Ken story. When we first moved there, we had a private line, and there were like 8 party lines down here at that time. And so I had gone in to the telephone company. I'd secured the fact that we could keep the telephone that was there and that it was a one-party line. And I got home, and all of a sudden, the telephone man is knocking on our door, and he comes in and he says to me, "I have to take your telephone out." And I said, "What do you mean I have to take my telephone out?" And he said, "I've got orders to take it out." And I said, "I was just down there, and I paid for this line to stay in." And he said, "I can't help it." He said, "I got orders, I have to take this out." And so we went back and forth with one another, and I picked up the telephone. And he said, "Please, don't throw that at me." And I said, "Get out of my house." And so he said, "Look," he said, "if you let me take it out, I promise in an hour I will be back and you will have a private line." And I said, "As God is your witness, is that true?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Okay, take it out, but you better be out. You better be back here in an hour, because I know that you're the only one that does telephones on the island. So you can't escape me. So you better have my telephone." I said, "I have a little boy who is, he was very, Doug was like allergic to a lot of things.
Okay.
And when I needed a doctor, I needed a doctor. At the time, I really wasn't aware that there was one 2 blocks from us. But when he came to take it out, I said, "You're not taking this telephone out." I said, "Number one," I said, "his father is not here. And I need to talk to his father every night. And my children need to talk to their father every night. You're not taking it out." And he said, "Well, I have orders to take it out." And I said, "I don't care." I went down and I paid the money, and I was told that this telephone would stay in, and you're not taking it. And so we're there, and, we're sort of like this with one another. You're not taking it. And he said, "I can't help it. I've got an order. I have to take this phone out." And I said, "I can tell you, you are not taking that phone out. I have a child that needs doctor's attention very easily, and you're not taking my phone out." And so finally he said to me, "Please, if you let me take it out, I'll mark it off that I've taken it out, and I'll come right back and I'll install it again." So I said, I did something like, "As God is your witness?" And he said, "Yes, I promise you I'll bring it back." And he did. But, Ken sent me down here and he said, "I should come down here and spend a year." And he'd work until we got things.
And where did he
Right.
work?
He worked for Clean Coverall.
Okay.
And
Now
he
I
was a
remember that.
supervisor.
He and Grandpa Murphy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He knew my Grandpa Murphy
Yeah,
on the
he
other
did.
side of my family.
He did. And so anyway, he wanted me to drive an old car that we had down here so I'd have a car.
And back then from St. Louis to Sarasota was more than 24 hours, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. And on top of that, I was driving over the Skyway Bridge, which is not like it is now,
Right.
the Skyway Bridge. And I had his mother and Stan and Doug and Chris.
Ken was married by then, right?
Ken was going to school.
Going
He
to
was
school.
he was going to Washington University. And so anyway, I forgot where I was in the story now.
Ken was working for Clean Coverall, and he wanted you to come down for a year.
Yeah.
And you drove this old vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
And the lodge was like a motor court or something, right? It was like a.
It was like 2 buildings, and there was 2 units. Our home, which was a 1-bedroom at that time. Later, I made it into like 3 bedrooms. Actually 4, because I made the hall into a bedroom for Doug. But of course, Gigi was with us, and I said, Gigi gets a bedroom. And I said, Ken and I slept on like an open area, and then.
Which is why you never had any more kids after you moved down here.
Well, I couldn't.
Oh, okay.
I had had an appendectomy when I was 3 months pregnant with Doug.
Mm.
And so my muscles never rebuilt
Okay.
because they just kept stretching. And so when one time when I went to the gynecologist, he said to me, Arlene, he said, you're never going to carry a child. He said, you would get to like 3 months and you'll lose it. He said, you don't have any muscles in your stomach. So he said, I know you don't believe in whatever, but he said, I'm going to turn your womb. And he said, hopefully you will not have any more children because all you'll do is lose them. So that's what happened to me. And where was I besides that?
You had come down. You were living on Siesta Key with the kids and the lodge. You turned it a 1-bedroom into a 4-bedroom.
Yeah, because
And you had another building that you rented.
oh yeah, it was like 2 buildings, and the building we were in had another little building attached to it, which we called Gulfview, and it had a bedroom like a little living space that we had some kind of little, like, you know how they used to have foam rubber covered with stuff, and it was like a sofa.
Okay.
Well, there were 2 sofas in there, and so when somebody rented, if they had children, they could put them in there, and then the bedroom would close off, and there was a little kitchen. And
And what was the other building?
the other building had, when I first moved there, had 3 units. It was called the Sunset, I think. And the other one, it
So it
was a
Gulfview and
2-bedroom. It's
Sunset.
called Dollhouse at that time, but I changed their names.
Okay.
Dollhouse. And upstairs was like a big 2-bedroom home, kind of. And it had a porch, like a roof that came out from the downstairs.
Uh-huh.
So it was like,
Like having a patio.
yeah, like
A
the big
balcony.
roof that was a big patio. And so then at one time I decided that during the winter time, retirees came down, and what they were looking for is price, and not especially a big place. So the bottom one that was a dollhouse, I turned into 2 units. And then I went upstairs, and it was a 2-bedroom, and I turned that into 2 units. And then there was a 1-bedroom, a 1 unit that really wasn't a bedroom. It had a kitchen and a little dining area, and then it was just open and it had twin beds in it. And so there was bolsters on twin beds, so during the daytime it was like sofas.
Like day beds.
Yeah. And so, eventually I took the 1-bedroom off the dollhouse, the 2-bedroom on the first floor, and made the other one into like studio apartment because I could get more money. And then the upstairs I divided, and one was sunrise and sunset. And so I divided them right in half, and I put a kitchen. I could do everything without a permit in those days.
Yeah.
And there was an old man, I guess he was not as old as I think of his being. He maybe was 60 years old or something like that, who did handyman jobs. And so I called him to separate the dollhouse and have a studio apartment and put a kitchen in it. So it was a very small little kitchen, and put a bathroom in, all without permits. And then upstairs, where it was like a kitchen, a living room, and a bedroom, I made the kitchen and the living room into like a studio type thing. And in the back one, I put in a little kitchen, or the kitchen was in there, and I just put in the front one. And I cut through the wall because it was a bedroom for the rest of the house. So I said to Ken, Ken, we could cut through this wall, and I would close it off, and we'd have another small apartment, because you could rent small apartments to retirees very easily. And so he started, and it was concrete. Oh, it was so hard. And he said to me, never, ever ask me to take a wall out again or to cut a door into it. And so I didn't. And in our own house where we were living, our kitchen had like a bar, and you sat on stools behind it. And it was a big room. And then it had a wall off. It was walled off completely, paneled, And so one day I got this bright idea about taking the wall down. And so I said something to Ken about the wall, and he said, I am not taking down another wall in my whole life. And so it was so easy. I called a man that I knew real well who was a carpenter. And I said, we got this wall that Ken won't take down. And it was just like boards on each side of the wall, you know. And so he took it down, and it was so easy, you know. And I never really told Ken how easy it was. But
So I know you were telling me earlier that when you came down, Ken wanted you to be here for a year by yourself while he stayed up in St. Louis working at Clean Coverall, but you got him to come down early. Tell us about that.
oh, all right. I really decided I didn't want to be down here a year by myself. I had his mother, and
And 4
Three of
kids.
the children.
3 of the 4 kids.
Ken was going to college, and so he stayed up there with his father. And after a while, I began thinking, this is a big job here. I never had worked with a well or a pump or anything, and I hadn't worked with a septic field. But this is what I did. Every time I called somebody to work, I followed them. And I soon learned what I could do without calling them. And anyway, by Easter, what happened is I started applying for jobs for him.
And where did you end up getting him the job at?
Well, the first one I got him a job at was Clearwater.
Which is 40 miles away, right?
Yeah, but I used to say, you go over that beautiful bridge. And one day he said, don't talk to me about the bridge anymore. And so I didn't. But then I did get him a different job. And I interviewed for it. It was called Sarasota Dairy or something like that. It was a milk company. So I sent a letter, and I put all my husband's knowledge about,
Route sales and things like that.
yeah, and being like a supervisor and so on. And I sent it to the dairy. And so one day the man who owned the dairy called me, and he said, would you come in for an interview? And I said, it's my husband. He says, I know, but I want to interview you. And I said, okay. So I went in. So I talked to him for a little while, and he said, we'd really like your husband to come work for us. And I thought, that's great. He's got a job. So I called Ken, and I said, you have a job at the dairy.
Did you tell him to get down here now?
Well, what the man who owned it said, anytime he gets here, he has a job. And so I thought, this is great. So I called him, I said, you've got a job, And he said, what do you mean? And, the first job that that is the way that one happened. But the first job he got was I saw a truck that said Coverall service on it. And it didn't seem to make any difference to me that it was in Clearwater.
It's closer than 1,000 miles.
So I called this company, and I told them all about my husband and how he was a supervisor in St. Louis of Clean Coverall. And so they called him and offered him a job. And he came down and took that job. But he quit because the man who was either the boss or the owner or something was a man who talked really mean to his employees. And my husband went in like as a supervisor, and he wanted my husband to sort of cuss them out when they didn't. And he said, I'm not like that. I'm not that person. I quit. So he came on and he told me he quit. So I said, oh, well, you know, the man at the dairy is a wonderful man. He is mayor of Sarasota. And he said to me when I went down to be interviewed for you, that anytime you wanted a job, you should just come. You know, he'd find a job for you. And so he did. But when he got there, of course, there wasn't a job. But he said to Ken, go home for a week and I will make the job for you. So he went in as a supervisor. And so they were wonderful people to work for until they sold the dairy. And then it was another dairy that took over. And so he quit.
Are you too tired?
You need to pause it for a while. She needs to take some drinks, hydrate a little bit.